I failed to record and I failed to ask Dana last week. And I'm really sorry I didn't because these things really are once in a lifetime. Um, Margaret, what's for dinner?
Oh,
Uh,
we're having tofu.
oh, I see. I was just apologizing to Suzanne up in Ottawa for eating my supper right in front of her. Now, and by the way, I was said to Suzanne that last week one of my daughters, my New York daughter, who's on Zoom
Julia.
with Parisian terrorists all day long.
Oh my gosh.
She said it's very rude to be drinking during a Zoom meeting. But
Oh, well,
I do
anyway,
not take offense. As far as I'm concerned, it's totally fine.
dinner time. It's dinner time.
so Martin Murray is here. He just did a Martin is on the history committee of the Arts Club of Washington. There is a tie-in here to the Arts Club, but we're not going to say anything bad about the Arts Club tonight because Martin is here. We don't want to offend Martin, and and then the rest of the people would have no idea what we're talking about. But Martin did a spectacular show last week. Were you able to go, Sandra, to the Smithsonian thing?
No, I think that's great to hear. Tell me more about
Well,
the
he
show.
did. I'll speak for Martin. He did 200 years of the 1607 Pennsylvania Avenue, and it was amazing, really. The characters, the Illuminati of the teens and the 20s in that place in the 30s, architects and writers and musicians. You know, Hans Kindler, the founder of the National Symphony, was a member. But anyway, Martin did that for the Smithsonian Channel last week, and I have to say it was fantastic, Martin. I just loved it.
My only regret, Burnett, is that I could only give a portion of a slide to you and your jazz concerts.
Oh, that was duly noted, Martin. In fact, as soon as you did that, I turned it off. That was all I needed to hear, you know.
I
So,
thought they definitely deserved 3 slides, but that was all I was able to do.
that was nice. That was nice. Oh, I've got people. I'm not. I'm failing to invite people.
Do you have a waiting room that people are?
Yeah, I'm being very bad about this. So hang on a sec. I'm on this thing all day long with my students, and you would think I would have this figured out by now. All right. See, Eddie Purcell is going to join us. Molly, yeah, we got a crowd here. Okay, fabulous. All right. All right.
Burnett, I just gave my students a password and now they hop on all by themselves.
Margaret said that?
Yeah, Margaret said that.
Oh, did you give them passwords to this?
No. I did not. For their lessons, I give them a password and then they can just hop on and I don't have to worry about them.
Well, I do mine without. By the way, your daughter just joined us. I thought I should warn you.
Well, yeah. Hi, Becky.
So let's see. Now last time when people were dark or lurking, I tried to encourage them to get involved because I wanted it to be, as Sandra, as I mentioned, I wanted it to be like a cocktail hour. But Dana had a full program, and it was an amazing program.
Yeah, not only do I not have a full program, I forgot to pour a cocktail. I should remedy this before we get started.
Okay, now the truth comes out. 4 years ago, I formed the membership committee, and I made sure the membership committee was just the right people, and that would include, of course, Sandra Beasley and a guy named Mark Apter and another guy named Dan. But Sandra refused to join the committee unless there was a bartender present at every meeting.
I mean, that's true, I guess.
You don't remember that, you know. It made an impression on me, and then we had to meet at the hotel there,
at the lounge, yeah,
with Nathan,
mm-hmm.
And we had this surly bartender who I've become very close to, who comes over after 5 minutes and brings Sandra her drink. You know.
Yeah, I have to say, now that people are drinking wine, this is just intolerable. I'll be right back. All right, now we're on.
All right. So now, who is Zoom Melanie over there? Who is that? Oh, you're on mute, Zoom.
It's
Melanie.
me, Peter, but I just.
Peter Haig. All right.
Yeah. Rename.
My neighbor.
Oh, really? Who are you?
That's Polly. You know Polly Rearson?
We're neighbors.
Great.
Hey, Peter.
Yeah, I think you did an event for Burnett some time ago and invited
Yeah,
me.
I invite you to all of these things.
I appreciate that.
Are you still living around here?
I am, yeah. Yes, I am.
On Yorktown?
Pretty much, I'm over on 33rd Street. You're like on Glebe, or no, George Mason or something? Yeah, cool.
Off between Williamsburg and Little Falls.
Right, yeah, no, I know exactly, yeah. Awesome.
So let's see, Martin disappeared somehow.
Hello, Burnett.
No, I'm still here.
Sherry just arrived.
I see you, Martin.
Just arrived.
So Sherry, I try to get Matthew. We do have a European here who's rubbing her eyes like this. Mina's in Stuttgart, but Sherry's son, by the way, for you Arts Club people, is Matthew, and he lives in Geneva.
That's right.
Where, and he is actually the member of the club, and then Sherry just rides on the coattails of her son.
Don't disclose all the secrets, Burnett.
Yes, yes.
I've got a couple events coming up at odd times for international audiences. I'm doing a reading for Ireland for University College Cork at the end of March. And then I'm doing an international women's poetry group where I have to set my alarm because I have to read at, I think, 5 a.m. my time. I think it's 8 p.m. I'm reading with a Melbourne poet. So I think I'm reading at a perfectly normal dinner time on their end, but I'll be getting up early. But you know, it's okay. I taught a class for American University that ran 5:30 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, which meant that I had some students in Shanghai who were getting up absolutely. So of course I actually ran my office hours on their schedule just to even it out a little bit. We got up a few times.
That's nice.
Yeah, trying to even it out.
Checking to make sure we've got everybody here. By the way, well, Sandra, I think we can more or less put you in charge. As I mentioned, I always have certain questions I like to ask. I just wanted to welcome everybody. Amisha Upadhyaya, and I don't know if we've met Amisha. Did we meet somewhere? You're on mute, by the way, and do you mind telling me how you stumbled into this?
Yeah, it was my friend Danny Sedone, and so
no kidding.
Yeah, so he forwarded me, and then it was I'm also a Barnard alum, so I think Sandra, you're a Barnard.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah,
So
I didn't go there. But the Barnard Women Poets Prize was kind of a big thing for me, and I got to read at Barnard with Joy Harjo, who's now the poet laureate of the United States, and at the time had written a book recently and was judging the prize. So yeah, beautiful setting. I love that campus.
So we're here in the Bay Area. I'm outside San Francisco right now. So
cool. Well, Amisha, welcome, and I'm thrilled that you can be here. Sandra, let me just go around a little bit. My old friend Sue Dale just checked in, who's a musician and very creative soul. I haven't seen Sue in at least 15 years. And Margaret Whiteside and Jim Chun are here. And Sherry Stevenson, who we already mentioned. Now, Mark Ohnmacht was here for a few seconds. Eddie Purcell is here, but he's hiding. We also have Sean Bryant here. And there's someone else named Sue who's lurking also. And but Sean Bryant is an old friend. I don't know where to start with Sean Bryant. Do I need to say anything about you, Sean?
No, I'm good.
No, we won't say anything about you. And
this is how the wild rumors start.
We'll have to have a separate evening, Sean, just for you. And Peter and I have known each other since West End Cafe days back in the early 80s, believe it or not.
Those were the days.
Yeah, those were the days. And Becky used to hang out at her brother's piano lesson and run around my studio with her mom. And just finished a pretty big master's at Georgetown in Asian Studies, right, Becky? And is working. Are you making bombs or are you spying? I can't remember what you got there. Something like that. And I guess that more or less covers the introductions. Eddie Purcell is somewhere around here, an old friend of ours.
Well, let me just declare that cameos.
Sandra, I'm putting you in charge for a while here.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if anybody has any animals / significant others / children / anything that needs to make a cameo, that's more than welcome. You're welcoming to see. There you go. So folks are pouring in. Well, okay. Thanks, Burnett. I think that my understanding of this space. So my name's Sandra Beasley. For those who don't know me, and I'm grateful for those who do. I'm grateful for the familiar faces in the audience, but often through Arts Club of Washington ties. So I grew up in Virginia. I've lived in DC now for the other half of my life, so to speak. So I've been in the DC, Virginia area all this time. And my understanding is that I've been doing a lot of events for Made to Explode, which is my fourth book of poetry that came out in February. And I think the idea of this is that I can talk a little bit about that collection, maybe read a poem or two. But I think the understanding is that this is a community of people who are artists, who are arts adjacent, who are interested in how we're all trying to kind of get through the pandemic time, but more generally how we make a living and navigate the world as artists. So I think it's as much a conversation as it is a reading per se. I'm really not determined to kind of announce my poems at you for the usual 20 minutes plus Q&A. I think I can read one or two poems, maybe just to break the ice, give people a chance to arrive and get settled, and then maybe just open it up for some general conversation topics. Does that seem fair? Yeah. So, oh, look at that. Burnett's showing off the book. Nice. So I think that, it's funny, I was just mentioning as folks were arriving, I'm doing a couple of events for international audiences in Ireland, in Melbourne, and some other places. And that has had me thinking about the difficulties of contextualizing some of the poems in this book. So I actually did some international travel. I was teaching in Cork. I did a poetry festival in Cyprus while I was working on this book. And I will admit wholeheartedly that it is in some ways a very American book, because it's really wrangling with the complexities of growing up inside the Beltway in terms of that push and pull of Northern and Southern tensions and identities. And so, I'll read a poem that is probably somewhat unapologetically American, and I apologize in advance for that, but it's also a good poem to read at dinner time. It's the first poem in the collection, and it requires that you be familiar with a very important classy food product, which is the tater tot. So just, if I can just make sure our folks, can we at least get a critical mass of people familiar with the tater tot? There we go, Suzanne's in. All right, excellent. We have tater tot aficionados. I mean, right off the bat in the first 5 pages of this book, you've got tater tots and you've got Long John Silvers. And I really don't know how I'm going to explain Long John Silvers to the Irish folks, but the tater tots I might try. So this is the opening poem. It's called Heirloom. It touches on the fact that many of the poems in this book are about food and food traditions, but in a kind of revisionist way. Both revisionist in terms of thinking of what makes a dish great what makes it quote unquote traditional, but also looking at some of the underlying tensions around food preparation historically. And let me just say, without further ado, all of my tater tot facts in here are factual. They're true. This is the story of how the tater tot came to be a dominant American faster food product. Lo, 12 children born to a woman named Thankful in Nampa, by the border between Oregon and Idaho, or as it will be remembered, or Ida. Lo, 2 of her sons drive to Miami, not knowing if their plan will work. Lo, what were once waste scraps fed to the cows, now repackaged. The fry shavings sliced, spiced, and oiled. Lo, the chef at the Fontainebleau takes the bribe. Lo, tater tots are dished onto the tables of the 1954 National Potato Convention and soon enshrined in the freezers of America. 3 decades later, the golden age of my childhood is a foil-lined tray plattered with Ore-Ida product, maybe salt, maybe nothing but hot anticipation of my fingertips. Lo, my mother is a great cook, and lo, my grandmother is a terrible one, but on tinfoil planes, they are equal. I need you to understand why my father will never enjoy an heirloom tomato, glistening, layered in basil. Put away your Brandywines, your Cherokee purples, your green zebras. Lo, as with spinach, as with olives, he tastes only the claustrophobia his mother unleashed from cans to feed 4 children on a budget. We talk little of this. Lo, what is cooked to mush. Lo, what is peppered to ash. Lo, the flavor rendered as morning chore, that this too is a form of love. That's the poem Heirloom, which is in Made to Explode. And it's, as I said, it's kind of stirring the pot in regards to thinking about food traditions, how we can come to them, how they're inflected by economy and family and caretaking responsibilities. And on one hand, I absolutely love heirloom tomatoes, but on the other hand, I recognize that they are a privileged product of living in DuPont Circle area before and Southwest now. They're a farmer's market thing. Burnett, you've got your questioning face on. I know you put me in charge, but let me check in with you for a moment.
No, I'm fine. I was just I was actually trying to find the poem in the book, and I was.
It's the first poem, page 1.
I think he was thinking about how he could improvise a little string on the piano to that poem. You know.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, something like.
Actually, so Sandra, I love that. So I'm one of 12 children. So when it starts off that way, I was like, whoa, I can't believe that. So we definitely had tater tots when I was growing up, and tuna fish hot dish. And I'm trying to think what else, but it definitely is right in there.
Yeah, there was a different version of this poem that circulated for a few years. So for those who are not familiar, there's an organization called the Southern Foodways Alliance. And I edited an anthology for them called Vinegar and Char, Verse for the Southern Foodways Alliance. And that was a great experience. The book came out in 2018. But when you do an anthology of other people's food poems, you start to notice what's not there, right? And in particular, there were a few things that I didn't find, but then motivated to write me to write my own poems. Like I wrote the boiled peanuts poem because I could not find a good boiled peanuts poem for this anthology. But this is a category of food that I kept looking for, the quick food, the freezer food, the food that my grandmother would pull out because it was the treat that she could give me. And I just, you know, it's funny when you tell people to write poems about food, there's a formality that kind of kicks in where they think they can only describe the best dishes, the fanciest thing. And I really was looking for those things that were about, no, like the downtime. I mean, the earlier version of this poem is quite specific about when we'd be eating these tater tots. And it was when we'd play Scrabble, right? It was when we'd play a board game that took a solid, you know, hour plus to play. And the tater tots would get started. And by the time we were finished with a round of Scrabble, they might be done. So yeah, I appreciate that. Also, Peter, you know, part of that is that the family that's actually responsible for the Ore-Ida dynasty they're a Mormon family. I'm not projecting that on you necessarily, but so that Low convention was in part because I was trying to find a way to hint at the fact that they you know, it was 12 kids and they were coming out of the Midwest, but I didn't want to start it off by saying like the Mormons that founded, you know, like that didn't seem right. I didn't want to code it in that way, but I wanted to do something to kind of hint at this tradition that they were operating out of. So, yep.
That makes sense. I took it more as an ode to the tater tots, you know, Low.
I like that too. The begats, the story and the history, the tradition of tater tots.
Sandra, I invited Mitt Romney because I wanted to have a Mormon here, but he wasn't able to make it. But Sean Bryant was able to make it. He is here to speak for the entire Mormon community.
I'm sure he was so hoping you would put him on the spot that way.
You know?
Well, actually, I'll be honest with you, Sandra, I knew it was coming, so I was just waiting and was ticking down the time before you mentioned that point. But yes. And Peter, I have to say, when you mentioned hot dish, or you happen to be somewhere from Midwest, like Minnesota, the tater tot hot dish sounds very familiar.
Yeah. No, my parents were both from Minneapolis, and yeah, it was whatever she could put on the table to feed 12 kids. But yeah, the tuna fish hot dish was, you know, a can of tuna fish, a bunch of like boiled noodles, and then a can of Campbell's soup, you know, the mushroom soup. It was like, could not be easier.
You know what though? It's interesting because there's if I end up reading another poem, it might be from a series that is about monuments and memorials. And why am I mentioning that? I'm mentioning that because anybody who knows my work knows that I do a ton of research. Like the poems are very curious about the outside world. And there's often a lot of science, a lot of history, a lot of detail. And I'm mentioning this because it's always a struggle to figure out to what extent you include that in the poem. Because if you're not careful, the show your work instinct can really strangle the nimble, heightened language qualities. So tater tots are super hard to make. It is actually an incredibly impressive feat of engineering, that machine that does the slicing and the splicing and the spicing and the oil to create that product, which I was so tempted to include in the poem. It killed me to like spend an hour reading about the production of tater tots and not get to cram that in there. But I think that's often the challenge with poems is, well, probably any form of art, knowing where to stop, right? Knowing where to find the narrative vein and to explore that, but also to not overload the poem with facts.
Sandra, I'm going to take a moment to welcome a couple folks here that have checked in. Dubem is an architect up in Brooklyn somewhere, and wandering the lonely streets of Brooklyn, which used to have a lot of people on them, and now she's there looking around, you know, like this. So I'm glad that Dubem could make it. And also, let's see, my very literally old friend, Peter Frisch, is...
You just heard her literally old? Peter,
well,
you're allowed to object. I don't know.
we go way back. We did a show at Duxbury Yacht Club that neither of us will ever forget. He is a theatrical director, was teaching at Harvard and then Juilliard, now is out in LA. It's a long story about Peter and a splendid story. But the highlight of the play that we did, I was the so-called music director, and was that one of the actors was the chef from the Boston Ritz. And so they had a scene where he became angry. He was some kind of a country figure or something, and he becomes angry, and he's carrying a whole leg of lamb. It was, of course, a real leg of lamb, dripping with grease and everything like that. And eventually he gets totally PO'd, and he throws the leg of lamb across the stage. I don't know if that was that planned, Peter? Do you mind commenting on that?
I have no memory of any of it.
Yeah, okay, they're very good. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was your idea or his.
You noticed it was being recorded, so
we're being recorded, yeah. But Sandra started with Tater Tots here, Peter, so I figured the leap to leg of lamb was not a big one. So Peter, we're going to have him do his own evening here, and he's teaching acting, to say it, to put it mildly, out in Los Angeles. I also wanted to welcome Joe Congloth, who obviously just came in from surfing. He lives up in the Hamptons. You know, there are rich people and poor people in the Hamptons, and Joe represents the poor people in the Hamptons, and it's a thrill to have him here with us. But he really does go swimming in the Long Island Sound every day, if you can imagine that. So we're glad that this is, so that we're not
actually technically not a Long Island Sound, but Ponquag Beach in Hampton Bay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of those kind of
specific here.
Yeah, Joe is one of those fringe guys that we're glad we're on Zoom and not actually in the same room with him. And
well, here's the thing. I'm going to probably have to.
Thank you, Joe. See you later. Yeah, very
cut
good.
It short and be half an hour. But I'm installing a hardwood floor right now at one of my places. So, but I wanted to take a break in the middle of installing a hardwood floor and hear your wonderful poetry. And thank you for Burnett and Sandra for putting this together. And I've been really enjoying it. So,
very nice to meet you in this space. So, yeah.
Well, Sandra, I'm going to ask you one of my big questions, which I warned you about already. There are 3 or 4 of them. One is, what's next? What's next for you?
Well, I mean, like a lot of folks, it's been hard to kind of manifest or think through developing projects. The 2 main genres I work in are nonfiction and poetry. So in addition to the 4 collections of poetry, I have a memoir called Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life. So it's ironic that writing as many poems about food as I do, editing a whole book about appreciation of Southern food traditions, I actually also have ridiculously strong allergies, including to milk and egg and some tree nuts and beef and shrimp and mango and so on and so on, cucumber. And actually there are some poems about that in Made to Explode. So why am I mentioning that? I'm mentioning that because the next project for me is probably nonfiction, not about food allergies. I've been doing a little freelance about that. But I've been working on a book that is talking about music, thinking about music. I think what's tricky about that is that it uses the through line of trains, and I desperately wanted to travel in order to develop the ideas for that book. So it feels like it's just now on the horizon for me to start thinking about getting into it again. It was hard to write about, travel and thinking about boundary crossing and all of the things brought up by trains in the lockdown of a pandemic. But, here we are, we have somebody in office who loves trains, who loves to travel by Amtrak. And I'm kind of excited to dip back into that project again. So hopefully that'll be what the summer lets me do. Yeah. Oh, you're muted. Oh, I get to say that to you, Burnett. You're probably never going to.
So I wanted to mention, I also wanted to welcome Basil Chapman from, I believe he's in Boston. Basil is involved in the alumni organization of the New England Conservatory, and is, my daughter was also an alumna, introduced me to him a couple of weeks ago. So thanks, Basil, for stopping by.
Hi, Brian, a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
And I enjoyed that very much. I did not grow up with tater tots in South Africa. But
that's you know, it's a great loss, Basil. But welcome.
Thank you. Anyway,
We've transported you.
Sandra, I say why don't you read us another poem, okay?
Sure. So as I alluded to, because I'm kind of the magpie for research detail, and because I work in nonfiction as well as poetry, I sometimes gather information about something without knowing what the project will be that holds it, whether it'll be an essay, a personal essay, a poem. So for a long time, I was working on what I thought would perhaps be an essay about my relationship to Washington, D.C., that would include specifically thinking about the monuments and the memorials. So again, I grew up in the area of Virginia, have lived in the city proper for 20 years. My father, among other things, retired as a general from the Army. So I was always kind of imbued with a certain amount of pomp and circumstance around pride or patriotism. Now, I think that we have very usefully, specifically in the last 5 years, really questioned the value of that. And I say that without, I think my dad is part of that. He understands that we've really revisited a lot of these kind of symbols. So I had been working on an essay about monuments and memorials that then I ended up kind of breaking down and reconstituting as a set of prose poems. And all of the poems in this series, the title evokes very quickly a monument or memorial and then the word midnight. Because if you live in DC, you know midnight's often the best time to visit any monument or memorial or public space. If it's maintained by the National Park Service, is typically open 24 hours. That's when you can park, that's when you can walk right up or approach it directly. And you'll often find a different crowd. Sometimes you get folks who are really reflecting on their relationship to these spaces that, again, I more and more realize are heavily edited, heavily curated, offer a very specific version of the figures that they seek to evoke. So in Made to Explode, there's a whole set of prose poems that are set Lincoln Midnight, Einstein Midnight, Titanic Midnight. These are all monuments and memorials around DC. Especially having grown up in Virginia, very much in the shadow of Thomas Jefferson. I went to a high school named for Thomas Jefferson. I went to the University of Virginia as an undergrad, and just really looping back around and realizing he's a terribly complicated figure. And in some ways he's a terrible figure. He really, he's brilliant, but also committed acts of really inhumane treatment towards those in his personal life, including the people who were identified as quote unquote his slaves, including Sally Hemings. So I wrestle with that at a few different places in this book, but this is a poem that I will simply say is called Jefferson Midnight. In another version of his story, he's a naturalist who dabbled in politics. He reinvented the plow. He joined the American Philosophical Society's Bone Committee, and while trying to prove the great Western lion, gave us our first giant sloth. He shipped a rotting moose to France to demonstrate the greatness of our mammals. He is a father of paleontology who didn't believe extinction was part of God's plan. He asked Lewis and Clark, should they encounter the mammoth, to capture one. For months, his seawall has been sinking, the Potomac's mudflats sucking at support timbers. In 1918, and for 6 summers after, the tidal basin was chlorinated. So this bank could become a beach, whites only. Spiders were drawn to rising heat, populate the ceiling of Jefferson's Memorial. Once the sun sets, the temperature drops. They lose their grip and fall. Bodies bounce off my shoulders. Bodies land in my hair. Guards call this the spider rain. And I don't, I don't require that poems have a strictly factual value. I don't, poems are not memoirs. Sometimes there's a distance between the narrator or the speaker of a poem and me as the author. But this is actually, the poems in this series are funny because I'm very specifically interested in how we curate and crop and juxtapose fact in a way that produces different realities. But in the actual de facto monument experience is often a very halcyon, very celebratory reality. And that often when you look at the larger portrait of what someone's done in history is a much more problematic and kind of troubled one. I did actually do a piece for the Washington Post magazine years ago about who goes to a Jefferson Memorial at midnight. And that's the thing that I always remembered about reporting that piece, was being there at midnight or 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning and having the spiders like fall on me. And the people who got paid to do it were like, yep, part of a job. It's a very strange thing about that space. Unmute, Burnett.
I'd like to hear from Peter, his reaction to the poem and the concept and so forth.
Well, my
no, I was thinking of a different Peter. Peter.
Okay, sorry.
Peter, we've already got you as the.
Peter, I want to hear from both.
No. He's our Tater Tot. Peter is our Tater Tot guy. I was thinking of Peter, the acting coach, who's on mute also out in somewhere near LA.
Are you on mute?
You're on mute, Peter.
He has to decide if he wants to unmute.
You're on mute.
Aren't you on mute?
Oh goodness gracious. See, this is right. the havoc you have wrought. Peter Frisch, you are currently muted, unfortunately, and we really want to hear you, but you have to undo that.
There we go. All right.
No, okay, I'm fine.
Hi.
So, no, I had my own associations with the Jefferson Memorial, and I was measuring that against the poem, as I guess people do with their own experiences when they read poetry. And the spider thing really is quite something. That kind of creeps me out because it seemed so pristine, and both in architecture and sentiment on the walls. And so I'm a little surprised by that. I'm not surprised by the mixed reputation of Jefferson. And, you know, I'm pretty fascinated by your take on it, you know, as well. But nothing significantly further to add. Sort of speaks for itself, I think.
Well, no, I appreciate that. You know, look, let's be honest. One of the toughest things about launching a book in a pandemic is that you do not get any of the conversations you usually do. So, you know, so I teach, and American University has moved all of its classes online. So I have plenty of Zoom spaces where I am either the authority in the room or I'm in the audience in a very clearly designated way, right? But what has been so difficult, and Burnett, I appreciate you trying to kind of muddle and mix the divide, is that I haven't gotten any spaces where I'm just in conversation with people, right? Because of things like muting and unmuting, right? And so I think this was a difficult collection. I really wanted, there are poems here that start in joy, but there's a lot more poems that start in trouble. And I think that's hard because you know, like a lot of people, I wasn't really looking for trouble, but that's what the last 5 years have given us over and over again. And I think that it's been, Sherry, you raised your hand. That, Yes, trouble. Yes. And so it's been, I really am working some stuff out. There's another poem in this collection called Monticello Peaches that is quite, by the end of the poem, quite self-interrogatory, that is thinking about the various peach varieties grown on Jefferson's farm, one of which is called the White Lady, and still to this day is called the White Lady. And just thinking about, you know, the things that we've got to kind of work through and be quite critical of, if unless we want to explode, not to be too neat about it. But, you know, so it's been an interesting, it was an interesting set of poems to write in this time. It was very strange to fix, or just for those of you who don't publish poems, or who don't publish books. So just so you understand, like, this book came out in February of this year. The text was, for all intents and purposes, set in the fall of 2019, which is what's necessary from a production angle. So you kind of make some commitments, and then you wait and see if the world is going to be transformed. I think if the election had gone a different way, it'd be an almost unbearably, it'd be tough, you know, well, it'd be tough for any of us to read, frankly, at this moment. But like, I think that I'm grateful that this book came out in the historical moment that it did, because I think that on one hand, people have the resilience and the energy to hope for something different, but also we're still asking questions. We know that there's a lot of really difficult, tough things that need to be sorted out. And this poem is, you know, wrangling, all the poems in this collection are wrangling with some of that.
Sherry, did Sherry have a question there?
I did. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
And I really,
so the thought that came to my mind when I was listening to your poem, which is kind of amazing, is the uniqueness of the imagery of the spiders. And I just wondered if you included that only because it was such an unusual personal experience that happened to you when you were there in that space at midnight or 2 a.m. Or did you include it because it also like was significant in terms of some of the darker things and unexpected things that we have now since discovered about Jefferson's life that, you know, one didn't know when they perhaps built the monument in this very solemn and kind of revered and even holy kind of place, and yet inside it there are spiders that come down on you when you look at it.
Right. Well, I think ideally as a poet, you're always looking for the details, the images that linchpin all those things in one place. And I think that I'll tell you what, honestly, like I had noticed that spider detail when I was reporting the nonfiction piece and couldn't give it the amount of time that I wanted to. The Washington Post didn't think it was that interesting. I thought it was super interesting. And so part of me was like that stubbornness of like, this has to land somewhere. But I do think that the way that there's that detail works for two reasons. One is that you've got the earlier revelation that the tidal basin in an earlier time was chlorinated, which, to be clear, would have killed all the marine life in it, in this name of kind of entertainment, turning it into a beach that was then a beach that was restricted in the population of who could frequent it, right? So I think that one of the tricks is, and you've also got, you know, like Jefferson, in his interest in being an anthropologist, had a kind of predatory, like, oh, if you find that, kill it so that we have it. You know, like, so I think in a way it's a genuinely experienced intersection with a larger truth about Jefferson's curiosity about the world. And then also I would just mention that I think that, you know, I think you're always kind of, it's a way of activating a presence, a narrator. And one of the things I struggled with these monument and memorial poems was how much of an I should be present, because in some ways I wanted to let the facts speak for themselves. So there's a poem called Lincoln Midnight that appeared in the Nation, the magazine, The Nation. And one of the revelations of that, which again is a fact that's available for research, is that, you know, Lincoln very famously has two he's got a hand gesture going on where like one hand's kind of closed in a fist and the other's kind of like open in this sense. And one of the realities is that this isn't in the sculpture, this isn't in the memorial, but the open hand is holding a handle. He'd gone to the tool shed and like grabbed a handle of to kind of basically to shape the hand. This was Volk's request. So it was a broom. So he's got a broom in his hand, but you don't see that in Memorial, right? Like, so, you know, so it's just thinking about the strangeness of these kind of edited out parts, you know, and trying to be open about them. But Titanic, so anybody who lives in Southwest DC, and then I'll stop, but Titanic Memorial, down by Fort McNair. So it's this like incredibly strange figure. I wish you guys had my panoramic zoom in this moment with outstretched arms. A lot of people don't realize it used to be opposite the Kennedy Center before there was a Kennedy Center there. But in that stretch of driving through Northwest, well, why did they move it? They moved it because that area kept flooding. So if you can imagine a figure meant to evoke those lost in the Titanic Memorial, where like there's these terrible photos where you see the water like up at the head, you know, like it's so the strangeness of these attempts to kind of memorialize anything, the ways that the original story gets wrenched, the ways that the original story then plays out in an organic landscape. I'm really interested in that.
Sandra, I want you to read, I have, as you know, I told you I was mentioned to you, I'm a big fan, if anyone knows, Hans Ulrich Obrist is a Swiss curator. He has the Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park of all places, and then he shows stuff all over the world. And he has a book that I highly recommend. I told you I was going to get you a copy, and then I found out it was $25 to stick it. And I thought, oh,
I'll get my
where am I going to get that? It's called Lives of Artists and Architects, and he interviews people that are quite famous: David Hockney, Ai Weiwei, Louise Bourgeois, Frank Gehry, so forth, over decades, and he publishes some of them. But he always ends the interview with asking them with what's not working, and that it creates, frankly, the most interesting conversation. And as I mentioned, Sandra, often he'll work with them with a gallery space to try to accomplish their goal. So, but before we get to that, I want you to read another poem, and then I'd like to hear from Suzanne up in Ottawa, who I haven't seen since the time of Caesar. Peter, I haven't seen since the time of King Arthur. So it's different time scales here. So anyway, if you don't mind, why don't you read another poem for us?
Yeah, there's a fair number of cameos by grandparents in this book, and that was in part because it was a way of thinking about history and about food traditions, like in that heirloom the heirloom poem. My grandmother, my Texan grandmother, Peggy, who was born in Houston, makes a cameo. But this poem is about Jean, who was born in small town Illinois on my mother's side. And I'm interested in the ways grandparents let us, well, first off, if you've ever done art school, you'll have a moment where if your subject matter even begins to brush up against grandparents, someone will say, oh, that's too sentimental. Cut that. You don't want to do that. And you know, I just deeply disagree. I think that if that's a useful way for you to access thinking about heritage, do it. And so I'll read this poem called Card Table, which is one that it's an elegy, but it's also thinking about the material nature of inheritance. Card table. A practical gift for moving to the city. Good cherry squared around black vinyl. 4 long legs that could fold within itself as a greyhound does, disappearing into a nap. Just big enough for a bridge match. Just if I'd ever had 4 people willing to kiss knees Just big enough to let me call a corner of that S Street studio my breakfast nook, stacked with a week's worth of newspapers while I ate cereal cross-legged on my futon. Just big enough to pull out every few years and complain how small the table was. Too crowded as a desk, too low for my chairs. In January, we stared at the strange space wedged between two kitchen doorways. Might as well try the card table. We stacked onions there, then potatoes, then tomatoes and peaches, and it became the chopping table, stirring table, serving table. Now, the first morning she is gone, I see a swipe in the vinyl where a hot dish burned through and realize I forgot to ask for anything, a ring, her sheet music. So what I have is this reminder that she too was once a girl in a city and that she knew I'd always need a table. All right, so that's
Thank
card.
you. Can we hear from Sandra? Suzanne, did you have any comments or a question? You're on mute, of course. Suzanne, you're
all right. I have a voice. It's a lovely poem, Sandra. And it's interesting that you're writing about things that you've inherited, and how our inheritances fit in our current lives. I think I'm at this sort of stage of life, unlike Burnett, who will never grow old, where I am getting rid of things, where I'm letting things go and wondering who they should go to and who will, what their usefulness will be. And that was one of the things that I really liked about the poem was both the usefulness of that inheritance and also how it got in the way. Not big enough or too big or too small. And that's going to be someone else's, and it creates times of decision making for other people, just as it is, for myself, and what I will pass on, what things I really don't want anybody to have. But I love the descriptions in that poem, and when you come to the line or the phrase "she is gone," suddenly that table is a person. Mm-hmm. I had to do a double take there to realize that we were now talking about a grandparent, and it really focused things very quickly and very, I think, very poignantly. So it's a great poem. I really, really like it. It's a powerful poem about something very mundane, which takes a lot of talent.
Thank you for that. It's funny. Look, my first collection, Theories of Falling, was doing a lot of the thrashing about and the well of the biographical, the things that I was working it out, so to speak, as an artist, right? Which is pretty common. And then I Was the Jukebox, my second collection, is very experimental, lots of persona poems, lots of wild, surreal poems, Count the Waves, about adult love. There's poems in this. I think what's interesting about Made to Explode is that there are poems in it that are doing really hard work that are the last thing I want to read in a shared space. And then there are poems in it that are doing communal work that they'd be the first poems I'd read in a shared space. I read that poem at my grandmother's memorial service, which if you'd asked me, I never in a zillion years would have thought that I would read a published poem of mine at an occasion. That's just not something that poets, people think we do it, but we actually try to avoid doing it whenever possible. And it really reminded me of the power poetry has, and it doesn't, not all poems need to do it. Not all poems should do it, but I just, it meant something in that moment to read something that I could see literally in real time, bringing comfort to people I loved, you know, like, and that was strange, but yeah, Jean was great. She was an opera singer.
Well, and I mean, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because I think occasional poetry is kind of where poetry came from.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. No, what I'm mentioning is a schism in how contemporary poets often approach. Yeah, I agree. You know, I think about this a lot in terms of like poet laureates, you know, and the things that it's a famously hard gig. You know,
it is,
really hard. Yeah, no, so yes, I understand.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure that was a wonderful thing for you to read at your grandmother's funeral. Perfect. Yeah.
Sandra, I want to get to what's not working, and I don't mean like today, but we all have things, whether no matter what we do, whether we're in a job working doing IT or journalists, or there's always something that we really want to get around to that doesn't quite happen. And with artists, this is pretty much a daily struggle. So I wondered if you see anything like that that you've been trying to put together for a while and is still in front of you somehow.
Well, I think that the practical reality of the people I know who try to make a living as art. So I haven't had full-time employment anywhere since 2009. I got a book deal at that time for that nonfiction book I mentioned earlier, and then kind of jumped out of the world of salaried employment. So I've been paying a ton of money out of pocket for health insurance and trying to live in the city, which is very expensive, and, you know, just kind of making it work. And I think what's tough with any of my writing projects, including that nonfiction that I mentioned, is that we're at a time where you don't get the one big payment for a day's worth of work that historically for me in the last 10 years was often what could anchor a whole month. I don't mind grinding out a living through some teaching and some appearances, some gig work, some freelance, but that only works when occasionally you actually get paid more than you're expecting for a day's work. And that usually comes through readings hosted by universities or nonprofits. And that has just not existed. That income's not existed in the last year. Nobody knows how to monetize Zoom readings, Zoom events. I've talked with people who run reading series about how they can distinguish a given person's appearance when in the exact same accessible Zoom space, they're doing 5 other appearances that month. We're just not sure how to make that work. Right. And so I think that in the absence of there's no security, there's a constant grind and pressure, and that chokes off creativity. I just don't know how to not be honest about that, you know? So I'm struggling to write. I think a lot of us are. I have an occasional idea for something that I would write that would reflect a pandemic reality, and I'll follow that, but it's not something I want to devote a whole book to, at least at this time. And usually my career is oriented around the book project. So that's tough. I also will just mention, you know, what it's, because I think it's very much in the spirit of what's not working. For the first time, I'm starting to wonder what to do as a teacher when people bring me projects that I just ethically do not feel are necessarily, I'm not happy about workshopping them in a way that suggests that I sign off on them. You know, like I sometimes am put in situations where people are bringing me, for example, persona series in voices where I'm just, I don't know if persona is what the world needs right now. I don't know if appropriation is what the world needs right now. And so I'm just struggling because I want to support the individual students, but I also, as a poet, don't want to kind of sign off on something that I might not believe should be centered in the literary space. And I'm really struggling with that. And I don't think anyone knows how to talk about it. So I think both as a mentor and as a practicing artist, I don't know if that's particular to the literary world. It might be going on in the theater world and the film world as well. But that's something that I don't think that's working. Like, and I think we have to find a way to discuss it that probably doesn't happen on Zoom, frankly.
Well, Sandra, just 30 seconds on my own experience. I travel a lot, as you know, and then I, like you, I like to hang out with people in New York or around the world, and that always gives me kind of a kick in the pants. And I get a kind of stimulation from people that I wasn't looking for or expecting. And that is like gone, you know, and it's been a year of that. And I think, you know, I can sit here and practice the piano. I work with my students and a lot of other things we could talk about. But that aspect is a major part of my artistic experience. And I'm sure that I feel like I'm operating at 40%. It sounds like you're getting that kind of feeling too.
I mean, I think what's terrific, look, you know, as a disabled writer, I love that this period is actually enforcing a lot of access points. I love that people with fragrance issues don't have to stress right now a lot of times. I love that when possible, we have events that are accessible for those with mobility issues. I don't have to worry about someone doing a set of stairs to get into a conversation. So there's actually a lot that I love about this period of time in terms of what it's exploring for folks. But I also, yeah, it's a tough time to do some of the difficult work, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, where you don't want to be the authority in the room and you don't want to be the audience in the room. You want to be somewhere in between and kind of able to kind of explore things. So I'll be interested to see. I think it's just bizarre that for those in the space right now who are American or affiliated as Americans, that we've had a year that was so traumatic on so many other fronts, and we went through it in a pandemic, you know, like, and we went through it in this, you know, and I think it's okay that we're still figuring out what that looks like for our art. You know, so I think I just want to create a space where folks can find their ways to the next project and not feel too much pressure. But like everyone else, I'm trying to pay my rent. So I also understand that part of it.
Right. So Sandra, I wanted to, we're going to wrap it up soon, actually, sadly. I wanted to mention, I wanted to hear from Dubem. She always has deep thoughts over there. So we'll hear from Dubem before we leave. And then I want to just say what's up next on our next,
sure, on
our next Arts Up Next program. Dubem, you're on the spot. You have to share a deep thought now.
Okay, deep thoughts. Well, first of all, hello, Sandra, and thank you so much for sharing your poetry. I guess I want to go back to the poem about monuments.
Yeah,
I found that very interesting. Kind of like monuments as experiential design, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think that they were designed and constructed to send a certain message. And so it's like when we experience these monuments, like are we now that like, because you know when they are erected, sometimes the message is political or of the times, right? The zeitgeist of the age. And so it's like as things shift and change, like is our experience of the monument now reflective of our moment in time right now, or are we still experiencing what the designers meant? So that's like, I'm not sure if that's like what you were trying to get across with your poem, but to me it felt very experiential. It was like your experience as a viewer of the monument. And it just occurred to me, I'm like, I wonder if that's in line with the original designer's intent.
Yeah, and if I can just Burnett, I heed your warning that we're wrapping up, but I really want to speak to this.
No, go.
So, okay, so years ago, when I was a college student at the University of Virginia, I had a dinner where I sat next to J. Carter Brown, who at the time was sitting on the commission that determines monument design. And he was at the time talking about this fussy group that kept insisting that there was a problem with the Roosevelt Memorial that needed to be built. And I just, I was young. He literally, like, he took a spoon and he went into my raspberry sorbet. Like, it was just a very collegial, weird space where I happened to be sitting next to a relatively famous person. Well, fast forward, and I later realized what he was talking about was the people advocating that the memorial for FDR needed to show him in a wheelchair. And he was trying, and as somebody who at the time did not feel comfortable owning a disability claim, but has since grown into that, and that's been a really important thing. It's so strange to look back and realize, like, oh, this was an active tussle. People were like, you're about to cut the ribbon on this thing, and it's missing this really important part of FDR's life that he himself tried to edit out. Right. So there's all kinds of interesting issues raised there. I do have a Roosevelt Midnight poem in the book. I'm not going to read it because those prose poems are kind of a little dense, but I tell you what, I love that memorial. I love to take people to it when the cherry blossoms have fallen and they reflect off that rose quartz. It's one of the most gorgeous things in DC, but I'm also deeply troubled by that memorial. I'm deeply troubled that it has a kind of virtue signifying of Braille, but the dots are so damn big that no one could read them with their fingertips. Like, all you can do is kind of look at them, right? You can't actually read the Braille. It's like these huge, and I think that to me speaks so perfectly to the irony and in some ways the failures of these efforts to create monuments and memorials, and I don't, again, I put this book to bed before realizing that there would be such outright, I didn't know we were going to be pulling down statues, and I'm glad we have. But it's been interesting to watch that particular issue kind of ignite. I don't have a neat end to my comment. I just want to say how much I appreciate your comment, and that I feel deeply in dialogue with it. It's something I think about a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for further sharing your stories. I think that's a really interesting and thought and conversation is the message of the statue or the monument being sort of excluded by the shaping of the so-called experience.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Is there anyone else that wants to weigh in? Anyone else who wants to weigh in before we wrap it up? In that case, I don't know if we have Ron Wasserman. He always has something to say. Ron, you can speak on subjects you know nothing about, right?
Oh, absolutely. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, so.
So what do you want me to say?
Perfect timing. So Sandra, Ron is our friend. It's a long story about Ron, but he founded the New York Jazz Harmonic and participated in Dana Burgess's evening because Ron has been principal bassist of the New York City Ballet since the time of I think the Apostle Paul, and the New York Jazz Harmonic was its main thrust has been presenting the women, the divas of New York City Ballet as choreographers, and so they've done some pretty big projects that have received a lot of attention, to my amazement, from Alistair Macaulay, of all people, in the New York Times. So not because they weren't worthy, but it's hard to get anyone's attention, as we all know. So anyway, Ron, thanks for checking in. We're actually about to wrap it up. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to actually close. There's a short poem that I'd like to very specifically introduce and maybe use to close based on what we were talking about. So maybe we can give him a little bit of value for his time, so to
Throw
speak.
him a bone is what you meant, the poetic term, yes.
So as I mentioned just now, it's been so important to me to kind of grow into my affiliation with the disability community. And I wrote about food allergies in my first poetry collection. I wrote a memoir about it, but took me a long time to understand the importance of thinking about the very quirky specifics of how I navigate the world because of this anaphylactic sensitivity to a lot of things that people take for granted, which comes up, it's not just a food thing, it's a social thing. It comes up at weddings, it comes up at birthday parties, it comes up as, you know, any space where food is shared. So I wanted to read a poem called Say the Word. And if you're on Twitter, which I am, you can find me at my full name on Twitter, you'll see it sometimes as a hashtag. And this is actually an argument for using the word disabled as an identifier. Now, if someone individually prefers person first language, always honor that. But it's pushing at the instinct to use euphemisms, to use differently abled, to frame it as a superpower, to do any of that stuff. This just good old fashioned claims disability and would rather call someone who's not disabled non-disabled versus abled. When I was trying to write this poem, which is part of a suite of poems in Made to Explode that sits at the top of the section, because I really wanted people to understand this disability identity, I dove into the origins of dis, right? And I think so what you'll hear in this poem is that it riffs on dis and on the kind of roots of the word disabled, but ultimately reclaims the origin of that word in myth and thinks of it not as a lack, but as a kind of a strength, so to speak. Say the word. To be apart, I'm told, to be asunder, to be a privative, negative, reversing force, to be reached only by oaths and curses, to have a black sheep sacrificed in my name because I'm a god, yes, as we are all gods on occasion, to be bodied as I am bodied, to be rich of earth, which is to be chronically chthonic, to be where the gems are underground, to be dis, to be dis, to be dis, to reject any pickaxe disguised as love. So, with a nod to Dis, the Roman god of the underworld.
Sandra, Amisha had asked me to make sure everybody was able to stay in touch with you. You are on Facebook and you're on Twitter, and there's a website. And actually, if they just type your name into, I have this friend named Mr. Google. If you consult with him,
better for worse,
they'll learn everything they need to know. Yeah. But let me urge you to grab this book. It's fascinating reading. I didn't get a chance to express my response, but I relate to it because Sandra just jumps around, and it's very, everything is very surprising and very free and very enjoyable. So if I didn't mention, I'm thrilled that Bruce Campbell is here tonight. He's been just lurking, and Eric Olson, Judy Metro, and Daniel Seiden, Ed Purcell, and whoever iPhone is. I don't know who that is. I turned off his video because I was afraid of what might happen next. And Jacqueline Gallagher is here as well. So thanks everybody. I think we got to say hello to everybody tonight, except for Polly Rearson, whom we did not say hello to. And Polly is a pillar of the community and one of those people that supports all of us in everything we do. In the arts world, I have to say. So anyway, we're all very blessed to be here. I feel like there was something profound I was going to say before we wrapped it up. Oh, our next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight, and our guest is Angel Gil Ordóñez, the Spanish conductor. He worked for many years. Peter, you'll appreciate this. He was an assistant to Celibidache in Munich during his training period for many years. And he and Joseph Horowitz, who is based in New York, the writer, author, and tremendous writer on culture and music, Joseph Horowitz. The two of them founded the Post-Classical Ensemble, which again has attracted the attention of the press, if you can imagine that. Joe Horowitz, wrote the book about the death of classical music, and then they proceed to present classical music. And because he says that, then Amajet and everybody else wants to talk about him. So go figure, you take what you can get. So Angel is a wonderful guy. He's based here in New York and also in Spain, where he's from. So you'll really enjoy my complaint. I have only one complaint about Angel, and he has far too much hair. All the photographs, so it's kind of flying, as he's conducting the hair, and so it will come up. Believe me, I will emphasize that problem in 2 weeks. So thank you, everybody. This is a fabulous crowd. Thank you, Suzanne, Sue Dale, who we didn't get to hear from, Amisha, and Sherry. Thanks for checking in. Sean Bryant for representing the entire Mormon religion, and Dubem, and Margaret and Jim, who, by the way, they were the parents of my student, Jeff, who put a lot of things together for me in Shanghai, astonishing programs when I went over there, and Becky and Martin, Peter, Ron, Judy, and the people that I can see here that are here, Daniel Seiden, and Basil. We have to get together sometime, have a beer. When I get up to Boston, the first beer will be on you. And no, that's not how you're supposed to do it. So Sandra, God bless you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
For this thing you create. I really appreciate it, Burnett. And thank you all for this such thoughtful conversation. It really is fun. Thank you so much. It means a lot.
That was great. Okay, we'll all be in touch. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.